प्रधानमंत्री जस्टिन ट्रूडो का कहना है कि कैनेडा 31 अगस्त की अमरीका वालों दी गई डेडलाइन तो बाद भी अपने सैनिकों को अफगानिस्तान में रखने लिए तैयार है। ट्रूडो वालों यह ऐलान G7 आगुआं नाल वर्चुअल तौर उत्ते की गई सिखर वार्ता में हिस्सा लैण तो बाद किया गया। इस मीटिंग में जाण तो पहला ट्रूडो ने अपने फैसले संबंधी भाफ भी नहीं सी कड्ढी।
So we just finished an important G7 call where we talked about how important it is to get people out of Afghanistan as quickly and as safely as possible. I emphasize that Canada is ready to stay beyond the 31st deadline if it's at all possible, because we want to save as many people as possible, and Canadians are ready to work to try and do that. We also emphasized how important it was to pass the message to the Taliban that not only should they be letting people have access to the airport in the coming days, they need to make sure that in the coming weeks, even beyond the deadline, people are able to leave Afghanistan. And finally, I talked about the fact that already in Canada, Canadians are welcoming Afghan families into their homes, into their communities, because we know we can do more to give a better life to people as they flee the violence and danger there.
Prime Minister, with President Biden not extending the deadline beyond the 31st and reports that the Taliban is no longer allowing Afghans to leave, is it too late, and has Canada failed the interpreters who work with our forces there?
We have welcomed over 2,000 people back to Canada over these past number of weeks. We're going to continue to work every single day to get as many people out alongside our allies. The commitment by our fellow G7 nations is clear. We're all going to work together to save as many people as possible, but our commitment to Afghanistan doesn't end when this current phase and this current deadline comes. We will continue to put pressure on the Taliban to allow people to leave the country in safety. We will continue to ensure that we're doing everything we can to get them to respect human rights and give opportunities to all Afghans.
कंजरवेटिव आगू एरिनो टूल ने ब्रिटिश कोलंबिया विच अपनी चोण मुहिम नूं संबोधन किया। अपनी चोण मुहिम नूं अगे वधाउंदिआं ओटूल ने आख्या कि घरां दी सप्लाई देश की तेजी नाल वध रही आबादी नाल मेल नहीं खा रही ते जिस नाल हाउसिंग संकट खड़ा हो गया है। नाल ही उन्हां ने BC वाइल्ड फायर बारे भी विचार चर्चा की।
This past year and a half has been incredibly difficult. Across the country, Canadians have lost loved ones, and hardworking Canadians have lost their jobs. There's a cost of living crisis right now in Canada, and there's forest fires, the images of which are heartbreaking in British Columbia. Instead of focusing on helping our friends in BC, on recovery, on the situation in Afghanistan, Justin Trudeau called an election. He put his own interests ahead of the national interests. And last week he said that he doesn't think about monetary policy and inflation because he doesn't think it impacts families. Only a Prime Minister totally disconnected from the real needs of Canadian families would say something like that. And the Liberals, the NDP and the Greens do not understand that running massive deficits year after year, driving away jobs and investment, that leads to inflation, which causes prices to skyrocket, gas, groceries. There's already a housing crisis in BC and has been for years. It also puts our social safety net at risk. So the timing of this election is completely reckless. The government should be focused on helping Canadians, tackling the issues in front of our country, but Mr. Trudeau once again is putting his own agenda ahead of the needs of the country. So tonight, you'll be able to ask questions about our plan, Canada's recovery plan. And it's important because Mr. Trudeau doesn't have a plan. In fact, in recent days, Michael, we've heard that he's calling for his candidates and other people to just give him some wow ideas, some big ideas, because after 6 years, he has no plan. As Canadians and voters should be very deeply concerned that we're in an election with a Prime Minister with no vision for the future. 12 years in the military taught me many things, but most importantly, you always need a plan for every mission. We have the plan. We're going to secure the future. And for British Columbia, every part of BC's economy.
ओंटारियो के चीफ मैडिकल अधिकारी डॉक्टर किरण मुरे ने प्रोविंस अंदर कोरोना वायरस की मौजूदा स्थिति बारे जानकारी दी। इस दौरान उन्होंने ओंटारियो अंदर चौथी वेव ते चिंता जाहिर की। उन्होंने कहा कि जिन्हां लोगों ने कोरोना वैक्सीन नहीं लगवाई, वह वायरस की चौथी लहर नाल ਬੁਰੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਪ੍ਰਭਾਵਿਤ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਨ।
We continue to see high case counts, and the doubling time of new infections is around 22 days, meaning the number of daily cases could double in that amount of time. Although cases are on the rise, the fourth wave is primarily being fueled by the unvaccinated amongst us. They account for the majority of new cases, the majority of people in hospital, and the majority of people in the intensive care units across Ontario. Recent evidence in Ontario shows that individuals who are unvaccinated are 8 times more likely to be cases than people who are unvaccinated. And when we look at those who are currently admitted into our hospitals, people who are unvaccinated are 29 times more likely to be in hospital and 48 times more likely to be a patient in the intensive care unit because of COVID infection compared with people who are vaccinated. Vaccines are safe and effective and preventing Ontarians from having to be admitted to hospital and, frankly, from dying from this illness. This is why you will continue to hear me and all of my colleagues calling on all eligible Ontarians who haven't yet been vaccinated to roll up their sleeves and get the shot. Already, we have had 82.3% of Ontarians aged 12 and over who have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, and we have finally reached our second dose target of 75%. Thank you to all the Ontarians who have made this important decision to be immunized. And I want to take the moment to express my deepest appreciation and gratitude to all the healthcare providers who have worked tirelessly over the last year and a half.
ਫੈਡਰਲ ਚੋਣ ਮੁਹਿੰਮ ਦੇ ਦੂਜੇ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦਾਖਲ ਹੋਣ ਮੌਕੇ ਗ੍ਰੇਟਰ ਟੋਰਾਂਟੋ ਏਰੀਆ ਵਿੱਚ ਲਿਬਰਲਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੱਡੀ ਲੀਡ ਹਾਸਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਖੁਲਾਸਾ ਇੱਕ ਨਵੇਂ ਸਰਵੇਖਣ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਦ ਮੇਨ ਸਟਰੀਟ ਰਿਸਰਚ ਸਰਵੇਖਣ ਵਿੱਚ 532 ਸਥਾਨਕ ਵਾਸੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਾਮਿਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਹਾਲਾਂਕਿ ਇਸ ਵਾਰ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਚੋਣਾਂ ਦੌਰਾਨ ਕੰਜ਼ਰਵੇਟਿਵ ਅਤੇ ਲਿਬਰਲਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੁੱਖ ਮੁਕਾਬਲਾ ਮੰਨਿਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ।
Lost week one of the campaign. That's often how campaign strategists look at this. Only a 2-point decline in support for the Liberals in our polling and 2 points up for the Conservatives. That's not even outside the margin of error, but it is showing that the race is tightening up and mostly tightening up in the key battleground of Ontario. Now, riding-rich provinces are Ontario and Quebec. No signs yet that the Conservatives are making headway in the province of Quebec, still at 16%. That's not enough to be in seat gain territory for the Conservatives. So a lot of this will be riding on Ontario, where they are doing better. And I think that whole belt around Toronto, that sort of traditional 905 area that we talk about in political polling, will again become extremely sort of crucial. Out west, we see three-way race, almost sort of a dead heat race in BC, almost a 3-point or a three-way tie. Whereas in Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, the Conservatives are going back or closer to their former selves in those 3 provinces as of late.
Last few days is just how consistent they are at the top line level. And so, it's not just a case of adding them together and averaging them. Like, you can look at any one of these polls and they're very consistent one to the other. And the clear message is that this is a very, very close race. But, a national poll in a national election is a pretty blunt instrument. It's like going to have a physical with your doctor and he takes your temperature and does nothing else. We're actually having 338 elections. And, as Christian said, you can sort of look at the regional demographics and you can try and sort of tease out how this election is going to go. But, all these national polls tell us is it's too close to call. And consistency at a national level, but not necessarily at a regional level, not necessarily at a demographic level. So there's a lot of runway left in this election. And, I'm not going to argue with any of the polls and their accuracy on the day that they were done, but I think there's the potential for a lot of movement in this election in the coming weeks.
ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਆਰਮਡ ਫੋਰਸਿਸ ਨੇ ਅਫਗਾਨਿਸਤਾਨ ਲਈ ਉਡਾਣਾਂ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਤੋਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਹਨ। CAF ਦੀ ਸੰਪਤੀ ਅਤੇ ਕਰਮਚਾਰੀ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਅਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਸਹਿਯੋਗੀ ਭਾਈਵਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਣਨੀਤੀ ਪੱਧਰ ਤੇ ਤਾਲਮੇਲ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਅਫਗਾਨਿਸਤਾਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਹਨ, ਜਿਸ ਨਾਲ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਾਂ, ਅਫਗਾਨੀਆਂ ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੁਰੱਖਿਆ ਮਿਲ ਸਕੇ। ਕਾਬੁਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਫੋਰਸ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਨੇਪਰੇ ਚੜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਇਸ ਬਾਬਤ ਸਾਬਕਾ ਮੇਜਰ ਜਨਰਲ ਡੈਨੀ ਥੌਮਸਨ ਨੇ ਸਮਝਾਇਆ।
Fully documented family whose father is already in Canada made it through a harrowing experience of accessing the airfield and flying out on a Canadian Armed Forces C-17 to safety. The family, however, is still in Afghanistan, obviously, made up of a mother and 3 young boys aged 14, 9, and 6. This was their 3rd attempt in 3 days to access the airfield, fully documented, I remind you. The 2 previous failed efforts lasted more than 12 hours each and involved terror at successive Taliban barricades, beatings, and the near trampling of the young 6-year-old. It's doubtful that they would have attempted a 4th time had they not gone through. And the only reason they succeeded is because the 14-year-old boy, the senior son, if you will, has rudimentary English, which allowed them to navigate the process. That's a good news story. The not so good stories are continuing examples of families being split up. And I'm not talking about extended families. These are mothers and fathers and children. So in one case, a father and his children got through, but not the wife because she didn't have the appropriate paperwork. And in another case, it was the wife and kids that were turned away and only the father that made it through. So there are several examples that are frustrating our colleagues on the ground, our former interpreters and their deserving families on the ground, and it's starting to become critical because, of course, they're losing any sort of credibility. We're losing any sort of credibility we once had with them.
So when you hear,
well, my reaction is they need to change. They need to loosen up whatever the rule is that's being applied on the ground at the tactical level. The measures that are being applied are too strict. They're not open enough, and they don't even meet the common sense test. It's not a question of numbers of forces. It really is a bottleneck at the gates, that the entry points to the airfield. I'm not certain that any number of forces could fix that problem. Everybody is running the gauntlet, if you will, in order to access the airport. And the issue becomes